Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we are taking a look at the vaults of Fallout, and I'm going to be trying to size up which of these vaults do people actually behave like they would in the real world. Let's get into it.
Vaults are a key part of the Fallout universe. Some contain horrific and twisted experiments, while others are actually shelters for their dwellers. Good or bad, nightmare or safe haven, these are all of the vaults in Fallout.
So this is interesting. You may ask, hey, why were some experiments and why were some simply shelters? Well, the answer is that if you're going to do research, the gold standard of research is experimental trials. And in every proper experimental trial, you need to have a control group, a default setting at which you can compare your experimental groups. So one of the things that's interesting in Fallout lore is that they don't actually follow the scientific method fully properly, as far as we know, because what you need is a sample size of sufficient size. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have a vault with some sort of, horrific condition, like the one where people have to choose someone to be sacrificed. Okay, so that's your experimental condition, is a vault that asks you to kill one person every year. And you have your control group, which is, of course, the vaults functioning as shelters. But if only one vault is subject to the experimental condition, then you will never know if that outcome is the norm or if there was some sort of fluke, perhaps one especially charismatic sociopathic leader who reveled in sending people to their deaths or something like that. What you would want instead is a large enough sample size so that you can say with a certain level of confidence that you're certain that these are the range of outcomes. So a better scenario would be to have 10 or more vaults with that condition set, with that rule set, against 10 or more control sets. Then you can start to draw conclusions. And the larger your sample size, the more confident you can be that what you found is not a fluke, but is really capturing a fundamental truth. And there's actually a mathematical formula to know that, right? If you know how a population is distributed and you take random samples, you can establish what's called a confidence interval. And you get to say, okay, in our research, we found the experimental group had this parameter. So we're 95% certain that the reality is between X and Y. It's a very fascinating way of understanding the world. And honestly, I'm a believer that if you don't know basic statistics and basic sampling, it's an essential field of mathematics to understand the world around you. It keeps you from doing things like making decisions based on anecdotes, and it keeps you from having these errors in judgment where you sit there and go, again, like having one vault where something horrific happened and saying, therefore, this is a feature of all vaults.
Vault 0 is located in the Cheyenne Mountains and can be found in Fallout Tactics. It had no experiment, it just expanded upon the Cheyenne Mountain complex and was sort of a headquarters for all of the vaults. Many pre-war geniuses were cryogenically frozen here. It is eventually taken over by the Calculator. Vault 1's experiment was unknown, but it was located somewhere in the Great Midwest Commonwealth and was the first vault commissioned by Vault-Tec following the success of their Los Angeles test vault. It appears in the tech demo for the cancelled Fallout 3 by Black Isle Studios. Vault 3 is located in the South Vegas ruins in the Mojave Wasteland and can be found in Fallout New Vegas. It was a controlled vault, so it had no experiment. Sometime after the Great War, a water pipe broke, forcing the door to be opened. Soon after, the Fiends took over the vault and killed the dwellers. Vault 6 is located in the Cheyenne Mountains in Washington. It isn't in any game, but it would have appeared in the cancelled Fallout Extreme. Its experiment involved releasing small amounts of radiation into the vault every day, slowly turning the residents into ghouls.
Well, I know in Fallout lore, it seems like radiation operates differently than radiation here in our timeline, in the real world. Obviously, for radiation to operate differently would require a totally different set of physics, but we're going to ignore that, luckily. But what would happen if you actually progressively and steadily dosed people with radiation? Well, the truth is, the first thing that would probably happen is they would become sterilized. And you would start to have a diminishing ability to reproduce. So the vault, instead of turning people into ghouls, would simply have a dwindling population as fewer and fewer children are born each generation, until eventually you would end up with just simply a final generation dying out.
Vault 8 was another control vault, located in Nevada and can be found in Fallout 2. It had minimal issues, opened after 10 years, and eventually became known as Vault City, which is a thriving community and one of the most advanced, non-isolated communities in the wasteland. Vault 11 is located a bit west of Boulder City, Nevada.
As we've talked about in other videos, 10 years is probably a little bit on the long side, but still a more reasonable than the hundreds of years of some vaults. Reasonable timeline to wait for radiation to disperse. As we've discussed, the radiation of a nuclear blast here in the real world reaches it falls off literally from the blast. Obviously, the blast itself has a very high level of radiation, but the radiation levels drop off in sort of a steady exponential curve, meaning that after 72 hours, you've really covered the steepest part of the curve, and then it begins to flatten out and maintains a smaller but steady state of radiation that will persist for a long time. Fukushima Daiichi, the Japanese power plant that had a partial meltdown, that is a good example of an area with a low but steady level of radiation.
And can be found in Fallout New Vegas. The Vault's experiment involved dwellers sacrificing themselves every year to avoid an automated solution response, killing all of them, sort of a test to see if someone would sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Vault 12 is located underneath Bakersfield, California, and is found in Fallout. The experiment required that the vault door not completely close, allowing radiation to slowly seep into the vault. It eventually became part of the ghoul town, Necropolis. Vault 13.
Yeah, that's just a lame experiment, honestly. Also, you end up with these situations where they irradiate people differently in using different methods, but the same fundamental one. You end up with a really bad sample size. If, for example, you say, hey, we're not going to close one of the doors, but in the other one, we're going to steadily dose them with radiation, that is two different experimental conditions testing for almost the same thing.
Is located beneath Mount Whitney in California and is found in Fallout. The Vault's experiment was to test prolonged isolation, with the vault being closed until Vault Tech decided that the subjects were needed, which was supposed to be around 200 years later. The water trip failed, forcing the Vault dweller to venture out into the wasteland to find a new one. Vault 15 is located in what has become New California and can be found in Fallout and Fallout 2. The experiment was that everyone inside had drastically different ideologies, which led to a schism where 4 groups left the vault, and eventually became the Jackals, Vipers, and Khans, with the 4th founding the village of Shady Sands.
You know, this is sort of one of the big debates that people have, is that ideologically motivated people. First off, people with really strong ideological bends, there's some evidence that they actually have slightly different brain chemistry, that strong ideologues oftentimes have sometimes greater concentrations of dopamine, have what's called dopaminogenic brains. And that is the part of the human brain that is involved in the desire and wanting. In some ways, it can be thought of as the ability to have dreams or theoretical visions feel real to you. And ideologues, right, they feel like that imagined, usually a utopia in their mind, feels very real, it feels very possible. And so you draw in a certain type of person that sometimes doesn't select for practicality, because oftentimes people with strong ideological visions are less likely to engage with the present state of things. This is sort of the example of ideological groups like, say, PETA. You notice they engage in extreme forms of protests when realistically, if their goal was to save animals, there's many, many other reasonable wins that they could easily get. A good example would be something like lobbying to improve conditions in factory farms, or just to try to reduce people's dependence on factory farming through, say, investing in alternative meats, right? All of these things, or even just movements like free range or organic or other things that improve the lives of agricultural animals. But instead, because they're ideologues, these compromise solutions that will actually make a difference feel like a betrayal or an acquiescence. And instead, therefore, they prefer to engage in extreme forms of protest that not only don't achieve anything, but in many cases are so disruptive and obnoxious that the average neutral onlooker who has a neutral opinion of the organization tends to skew against them. The only people that seem to view PETA and substitute PETA for your favorite or least favorite ideological organization, because they all do it, is that they do these protests to help polarize people that already like them. Right? When you do obnoxious things like that, the people that already sort of like you more, but people who are against you are much, much, much more dug in against you, and people who are neutral also become more dug in against you. This is just how human beings operate. So the old saying, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, is absolutely true. If your goal is to actually bring people to your cause, you have to do so in ways that are reasonable, practical, and really come off as someone who is very, very functional and delivering real good in the people's actual everyday lives.
Vault 17 is located somewhere in New California.
So it would make sense, of course, that if you brought 4 different ideologies into a vault, they would either become raving, polarized lunatics, or they would perhaps be forced by simply the practical realities of surviving to abandon their ideologies, right? And that can be true. If you take someone oftentimes with a deep ideological commitment, but you remove them from the social context that sort of reinforces that belief. Say, don't let them get on Twitter or not let them communicate with their other half-baked idiot friends, then oftentimes those people will, over time, sometimes fairly quickly, in as little as 30 days, actually change their ideological bend. They'll become less extreme.
And is mentioned only in Fallout New Vegas. In 2154, it was raided by the Master's Army. Only Lily Bowen, Becky, and Jimmy survived. When Lily was 75 years old, she was captured and turned into a Nightkin by the Master's Army. Vault 19 is located southwest of the remains of McCarran International Airport in Nevada and can be found in Fallout New Vegas. The Vault's experiment had the Vault dwellers be separated into 2 groups with little to no contact between them. After a leak in the ventilation system caused paranoia to grow, the Vault became abandoned and is used by the Powder Gangers. Vault 21 is located...
I don't understand that experimental condition. Again, like we talked about, you already created that condition by having other isolated vaults that are cut off from each other. So why you would create sub-vaults, it's not clear on even what variable is being tested, let alone whether or not this is being repeated enough to warrant that level of testing.
Located beneath New Vegas and can be found in Fallout New Vegas. The experiment was that all differences were settled by games of chance, and the dwellers were all compulsive gamblers. Between 2271 and 2281, Mr. House took over the vault after the dwellers let the fortune of the vault ride on a game of blackjack, which they lost. Mr. House then destroyed most of it and turned what remained into a hotel.
Here's the thing, what's sort of interesting. Now, obviously, when he refers to gamblers, they're usually describing gamblers that engage in games of chance in, say, casinos or sports betting. And in every one of those games of chance, the house always has an edge. This is how the house economically survives. The house understands statistics and understands that on a long enough timeline, everyone will lose because of how the odds of each game are structured. Now, there's gambling, and then there is calculated risk-reward trade-offs. And these are different. You are taking a risk when you, say, invest in Amazon, the company, right? You buy some Amazon stock. You're taking a risk that that company may do poorly in the future, that company may do well, but as a part owner of that company, then you're still putting up your money in exchange for a potential larger payoff or a potential loss, and you don't know which one. But through careful research and a general sense of how sort of the economy works, you can be reasonably certain, and the wealthiest people in the world operate on this risk reward trade-off. They try very hard to not just understand the risk they're making. For example, let's say you put up $100 and you knew there was a 50% chance that it would drop to 50 or double to 200. Well, think about it. Let's say you ran that game again and again and again and again. You would make a tremendous, tremendous profit because the upside offsets the downside. And once you understand how to do that mathematics, then you can start to do it for more complicated models. You can ask yourself, should I buy this house, right? It may go up in value, it may go down in value, but you do the math and you say, okay, even if it goes down in value, it's still more profitable for me to buy this house than to rent where I own nothing at the end of the day. So this is how every single hedge fund, every single wealth manager, even every business person, every business owner does their calculations. If we launch a new product, there's a 50% chance it becomes our best-selling product ever and a 50% chance that we can't even move our product. Obviously, their math is much more complicated and much more multivariate, but the point remains that there's gambling and there's calculated risk return. Calculated risk return is a great way to understand decision makings on a really large scale, like say running a vault. Degenerate gambling, not so much.
Vault 22 is located northeast of Jacobstown in Nevada and can be found in Fallout, New Vegas. There was no experiment, just scientists studying plants. A fungus from Big Empty was brought in, which quickly infected everyone and turned them into spore carriers. Vault 24's location is unknown and isn't mentioned in any game. Any details about the vault are unknown. A jumpsuit is referenced in Fallout New Vegas' game files. Vault 27's location is unknown, but is mentioned in the Fallout Bible. Its experiment would have been that it was overcrowded, having 2,000 people instead of the standard 1,000. The Fallout Bible will be mentioned quite a bit in this video. It's a group of several documents written by Chris Avallone, and contains detailed background information about the first few Fallout games. It was considered canon at the time, but isn't any longer. Despite that, the vaults mentioned are included in this video, as they were once canon. Vault 29's location is unknown, but is mentioned in Fallout and indirectly referenced in Fallout New Vegas. The experiment would have been that every vault dweller that initially entered the vault would be less than 16 years old. Vault 34 is located outside of New Vegas in Nevada.
So another Lord of the Flies type situation is intriguing in a lot of ways. Human beings obviously depend heavily on knowledge being passed down from one person to another. But survival knowledge is essential. And the truth is that human beings, like all creatures, have certain instincts that will drive them towards reproductive success. We have big brains that mature as we develop and that can adapt to a lot of different circumstances, right? Look, human beings survived in the cold regions of Siberia and in the jungles of the Amazon with the same brain and the same 4 limbs. So the idea that 16-year-olds, right, whose obviously brains are not fully mature in the same way, would be unable to adapt to a changing circumstance like being locked in a vault is pretty unlikely, right? The entire vault population will mature, they would produce the next generation, and it would probably stabilize towards a mean. I think some knowledge would be lost, but in some ways it would be more efficient because while a typical, say, vault with a typical population spread may cling to certain traditional things that aren't really essential to surviving in a vault. Even things like complex mathematics, studying poetry, right? These things aren't essential skills to surviving in a vault, but instead a teenager with no assumptions about how things need to work, no traditions baked into their brain, they may look and say, they may reach adulthood and say, what do we need to teach the next generation? And they may look at very practical things like how to efficiently prepare your food, how to resolve conflicts in a way that avoids violence, or if there is violence, ensure that it's ritualized and doesn't spread. These are actually probably more essential skills. I suspect that such a vault with a no assumptions vault might actually thrive relative to vaults that cling to outdated, antiquated traditions.
And can be found in Fallout New Vegas. The Vault's experiment was that it had a ridiculous amount of weapons, armor, and recreational facilities at the cost of living space. The Vault became overpopulated. The Overseer locked the weapons away, the Vault dwellers rioted, then left, with most of the remnants turning into ghouls. According to the Boomers, they came from this Vault. Vault 36's location is unknown and is mentioned only in the Fallout Bible. Its experiment would have been that the only food available was a thin, watery soup-like mixture. Vault 39 would have been located in what used to be.
Yeah, this is interesting. Obviously, human beings need a lot of calories to survive. To maintain your weight, again, that 2,000 calorie average is pretty much spot on. So now, is it just because there was 2,000 calories, but it was only done through a thin, tasteless, watery soup? Or is there actually not enough calories and the population would have slowly starved?
Abilene, Texas. It would have been found in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel 2. Its experiment is unknown, but it would have been overcome with plant life, similar to Vault 22. Vault 42's location is unknown and is mentioned only in the Fallout Bible. Its experiment would have been that all light bulbs in the vault were 40 watts or less. Vault 43's location is...
That's just silly and arbitrary. You would just have people with poorer vision or with brains better able to interpret subtle changes in the darkness, right? 10 years, 100 years, it's not enough time to evolve necessarily, but brains being plastic probably would be trained to process information differently. I suspect they would process subtle changes in shadow more accurately than the vault than say you or I.
Is unknown, but is found within one man and a crate of puppets, an official Fallout webcomic by Penny Arcade. The experiment was that the only dwellers were 20 men, 10 women, and 1 panther. Vault 53's location is unknown, and is mentioned only in the Fallout Bible. Its experiment would have been that most of the equipment inside the vault would regularly break down, causing unending stress among the dwellers. Vault 55's location is unknown, and is mentioned only in the Fallout Bible. Its experiment would have been that there was no entertainment tapes within the vault.
So here's what's interesting about some of these concepts. First off, in traditional societies, so it is in traditional societies, right? You don't need as many men as women to maintain a population. Think about it logically. The men and obviously you need a biological male and a biological female to produce offspring. However, a biological male can inseminate dozens potentially of partners successfully, whereas a woman can only bear, one, at most, really 2 children in one 9-month gestational period. And because they generally aren't able to ovulate while they're nursing, you're talking about a max of about 1 offspring a year. That means that in a lot of traditional societies, you oftentimes ended up with extra males. There is a whole field of sort of evolutionary psychology as to how the way people operate based on sort of like pre-industrial tribal sort of dynamics. But societies do often end up with these problems. And in societies that also have significant wealth inequality, you can get some pretty gnarly outcomes. Good example would be parts of the world where it's common for one man who has significant control of resources to have multiple wives. Now, the math doesn't work out on that because, again, human beings produce males and females at about a 50-50 rate. So you end up with a significant surplus of males who have no prospects of being, starting a family, pairing up, passing on their genes. And solving this problem is tremendously difficult because it is a massive problem, right? I don't want to be a gender essentialist, but men do have higher levels of testosterone, and the research does seem to indicate that makes them somewhat more prone to violence. This is true in almost every society. So I'm relatively confident in saying that, obviously not as like a universal truth. But given that reality that you have that societies that have fewer males able to reproduce, that control a larger share of the resources, and a large population of basically males that will not have reproductive success but experience tremendous frustration at that fact, is extremely troublesome. And when it occurs in societies that don't have a solution to it, and sometimes that solution is things like ritualized war. Sometimes that solution is things like casting out of unpartnered men. But there's very few good solutions to that sort of situation.
Vault 55's location is unknown and is mentioned only in the Fallout Bible. Its experiment would have been that there were no entertainment tapes within the vault, except for those done by an exceptionally bad comedic actor. Vault 68's location is...
Human beings are great at entertaining themselves. What probably would have happened is they would have invented a lot of their own games that would become increasingly elaborate and ritualized, and then would become more entertaining than entertainment tapes. They'd basically be they'd be a vault of phenomenal chess players and incredibly skilled card players.
Is unknown and is mentioned only in the Fallout Bible. Its experiment would have been that there were 99 men and only 1 woman inside the vault. Vault 69's location is unknown and is mentioned only in the Fallout Bible. Its experiment would have been that there were 99 women and only 1 man inside the vault. Vault 70 is
Vault 69.
located in Salt Lake City, Utah, and would have been
99 men and 1 woman in a vault would have no chance of reproductive success. Unless the vault opened in only 10 years, it would be donezo.
found within Van Buren. The vault's experiment was that all mechanical parts of the vault jumpsuits would fail 6 months after the vault door closed. Vault 74's
What is the point of that experiment?
location would have been somewhere in the Nevada area, as it appears in the game files for Fallout New Vegas. The only information about the vault is a log from the Overseer, which reads, Data log number 10.14.78. The vault has been breached. There was not enough power to level 5. God have mercy on our souls. Vault
Eerie.
75 is located beneath Malden Middle School in the Boston area and can be found in Fallout 4. The vault's experiment was that the parents were executed when the vault door closed, and the children underwent grueling mental and physical testing to create superior humans. If they weren't up to the standards when they turned 18, they were executed, with the rest joining the vault's science team to continue the study. Vault 77's location is on...
What is it? Superior humans? Okay, here's the problem with the superior human argument. Human beings, like every creature that's a product of evolution, is not superior and inferior. We think of something that is steps before us in evolution as being inferior or unoptimized. This isn't quite the case. The animal is optimized for the environment, right? It's optimized to be competitive in that environment and to compete against other native flora and fauna. Human beings, no different. Our social structure, our biology, our abilities were optimized for a certain type of survival, to live in a certain way. And obviously, over time, that way has changed, and there's some evidence, limited though, that humans have done a little bit of evolving with it. For example, large segments of the human sort of population can consume milk, can consume lactose, and while many cannot, not lactose, they can consume cow's milk. But large portions of humankind cannot. So it shows that in some places, cow's milk was a valuable and important food source, and so human beings sort of evolved to consume it. There's also some sort of like changes we think to our teeth to eat more like wheat type foods. But the point is that to believe that you can create a superior human is not necessarily true. You may be able to evolve humans in a tailored direction, similar to the way that human beings have said, hey, we want our strawberries to be bigger and tastier and sweeter. And so we through selective breeding, create plants that produce these strawberries. But they're not optimized for the wild. Their fruits are too potent, too resource intensive for the wild. They would never survive, but they're optimized for our gardens. They're optimized to be grown by us, humans. And so you would never, we are the superior human. That's the point I'm trying to make here. We are the human that is optimized for this world. And, the idea of a measurably superior human is pretty erroneous. That you can't rank. I mean, human beings we're optimized for our environment or for an environment of the past. And if the environment changes, then perhaps human beings will evolve and change with that. But even that's not clear based on our technological ability and our moral character.
Unknown, and is mentioned in the Penny Arcade webcomic One Man and a Crate of Puppets, though a jumpsuit can be found in Fallout 3. The Vault's experiment was that there was only one dweller who had a crate of puppets as its only company. Within 3 years, he had given roles to the puppets and acted like they were real people. Just after 3 years in the Vault, he managed to escape. Vault 81 is located in the Boston area and can be found in Fallout 4. The Vault's experiment was to use half of the dwellers as guinea pigs for medical experimentation. Shortly before the first test was scheduled to take place, the Overseer shut it down. Over the next 200 years, the Vault prospered and opens without issue to trade with nearby settlers. Vault 87 is located due west of Arafu and can be found in Fallout 3. This vault could be a video of its own, but the experiment involved the use of FEV on various test subjects within the vault. Most of them died after exposure to the virus, but the rest were turned into super mutants, which became the source of the super mutants in the Capital Wasteland. Vault 88 is located beneath Quincy Quarries in the Commonwealth and can be found in Fallout 4. There was no experiment, as the vault was intended to be used as a place to test various devices that would be implemented into other vaults, but it was never finished. The sole survivor can find it and turn it into a settlement in Fallout 4. Vault 92 is located east of Oasis in Washington, D.C., and can be found in Fallout 3. The Vault's experiment involved creating a series of super soldiers via subliminal messaging. The inhabitants were all musical prodigies from across the globe. The dwellers became monstrous with rage and began to slaughter the rest of the Vault inhabitants.
Okay, tough to understand that, what they thought they were going to achieve there. Again, super soldiers is sort of an annoying concept because oftentimes these are people making trade-offs. And while you could optimize a soldier for one type of war, there's no guarantee that it would be functional in another type of war. You might, for example, have a soldier that is less afraid of sacrificing him or herself. You might have a soldier that is less likely to develop PTSD, for example. That's less liable to have heat stroke. But oftentimes when you start tweaking with people, when you start tweaking with any biological life, you make trade-offs, and you may not necessarily know what those trade-offs entail. Look no further than dog breeds, for an example. Dogs are bred to be optimized for, say, being a racing greyhound, optimized for speed and a strong prey drive. But you make trade-offs. Their hips they have a litany of medical problems that have accompanied this. So have you produced a super soldier dog? Have you produced a super dog? No, you've produced a greyhound that's good at a narrow set of things and pretty terrible at the rest of them.
Vault 95 is located at the northeastern edge of the Glowing Sea in the Commonwealth and can be found in Fallout 4. The experiment surrounded chem addiction, as the initial dwellers would suffer from chem addiction and would be rehabilitated for 5 years, after which a Vault Tech employee would find a hidden cache of chems. The dwellers immediately ruined the families they had created with each other, and most of them likely overdosed and died. Vault 100's location is unknown, and is referenced in the game files for both Fallout 3 and New Vegas. As such, what the Vault's experiment would be is unknown. Vault 101 is located in Springvale, Washington, D.C. in the Capital Wasteland, and can be found in Fallout 3. The Vault's experiment was to test the role of an omnipotent overseer in a community remaining in indefinite isolation from the outside world, and study the reactions of the dwellers should the isolation be broken. Several dwellers left the Vault in secret over the 200-year history of it, but it was mostly kept a secret from the rest of the Vault. In 2277, a scientist escaped from the Vault and left chaos in his wake. Vault 106 is
Okay, you can't have an omnipotent overseer. You could have an authoritarian overseer, a totalitarian overseer, but omnipotence is a term reserved for God. you can have an omnipotent deity as a theoretical concept, or the universe is omnipotent. You could say omnipotent, omnipotent. It means all powerful. It means the ability to do all things, anything that you could will. Now, you could have an overseer with absolute authority, absolute power, but it's often constrained by obviously the natural world and their own vision, right? You could, an omnipotent, yeah, an omnipotent God could do things like say, no one will speak ill of me ever. That is something that omnipotence could have. But a totalitarian might say, there will be severe punishment if you speak ill of me, even in private. Those are different things.
Located southeast of Arafu in the Capital Wasteland and can be found in Fallout 3. The Vault's experiment was that psychoactive drugs would be pumped into the Vault's air filtration system 10 days after the Vault door closed. What happened after is unknown, as everyone found inside the Vault is insane, as the drugs are still being pumped throughout the airways 200 years after the Great War. Vault 108 is located south of Canterbury Commons in the Commonwealth and can be found in Fallout 3. The Vault's experiment was to study how people battle for leadership and power. The first dweller died within 40 months, as he had a rare form of cancer, and the power supply was scheduled to malfunction after 20 years, despite the Vault being closed for 38 years. The Vault also contained a cloning lab. A man, Gary, was cloned one day. The new Garys were immediately hostile to non-Garys, with each becoming more and more aggressive. By the time the scientists had a plan for how to deal with the clones, the Garys revolted and took over the Vault. Vault 111
I don't even know what to make of that.
is located in Sanctuary Hills, Massachusetts in the Commonwealth and can be found in Fallout 4. The Vault's experiment was to test the long-term effects of cryopreservation on a select group of Vault dwellers. An all-clear was supposed to come after 180 days, but it never did. Facing dwindling supplies, the Overseer didn't open the door, despite everyone demanding it. They staged a mutiny, and the Overseer places the Vault in lockdown in response. What happens next is unknown, though Kellogg makes his way inside, murders the sole survivor's spouse, and steals their child sometime after. Vault 112 is located below Smith Casey's garage in the Capital Wasteland, and can be found in Fallout 3. The Vault would be home to only 85 dwellers, and would all be suspended in virtual reality indefinitely, or until the experiment was deemed finished by Vault Tech. The Overseer, Dr. Stanislaus Braun, had complete control over the inhabitants, and by 2277, only a few remained, as Braun had gone mad with power since he was essentially a god inside the virtual reality.
That would be an example of a place that he could perhaps exert a form of omnipotence.
Vault 114 is located near the Park Street station in the Commonwealth and can be found in Fallout 4. The Vault's experiment was that all the Vault dwellers were upper class, as well as local members of government. They were told that the Vault would have exceptional luxury, when it actually did not. The Overseer was also selected because he was anti-authority. The Triggermen now control the Vault. Vault 118 is located on an island along the coast of Maine and can be found.
I mean, so this is one of the things that's interesting about human beings is that their view of luxury is often relative. There's a saying, if you ever watch any of those fairly wealthy or successful like business people, startup people getting interviews, they often say that they have a tremendous amount of wealth that we would all look up to, but they often report that simply gaining levels of wealth moves them into new clubs in which they are the smallest member at a rival. So you have when the 100 million, right? When Mark Zuckerberg made his $100 million, he was in a club of people with hundreds of millions of dollars, and he was the brokest one initially. And then as he rose through, became a billionaire. Well, then he was in the billionaires club. And luxury is relative. To me, flying first class would be an unattainable luxury. I would feel guilty. It would be so expensive. But to, again, a Mark Zuckerberg of the world, flying not in a private jet would be a terrifying and humiliating experience. So it's all relative. So just telling someone that they are in a luxury vault, they would probably interpret what they're seeing as being luxury, and would probably, if they weren't able to compare to another vault, may actually just believe that the other vaults are far, far worse than the one they are in, and would only understand the actual mediocre condition of the vault if they were able to see another one to compare it to.
Found in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC. The experiment was supposed to study the interaction between two groups of dwellers, one being high class, with the others being low class. The second wing to house the lower class was never finished, so the experiment never came to be. The few scientists inside put their brains into robo-brains, which drove the Overseer to the point of suicide. Vaults 177, 199, 314, 333, 525, 730, 813, 899, and 909 can all be explored in Fallout Shelter throughout various quests found in the game. If there were any experiments conducted inside the vaults, what they were remains a mystery. Before I end the video, there are a few vaults that didn't have numbers. The Burkittsville Vault would have been located in Burkittsville, Maryland, in the Capital Wasteland, and will be found in Fallout 3. What experiment, if any, went on inside is unknown, but a group of cannibals did set up camp near the vault entrance soon after the door closed, and ate anyone who came near it. It was supposed to be in Fallout 3, but was cut. The secret vault is located beneath Los Ibanez, Texas, and is found in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. There was no experiment. Instead, it served as a research facility for the high-ranking government officials and scientists who wouldn't be subject to the same regulations as the other vaults, meaning it was kept a secret from the US government, who had a hand in creating the other vaults. Of the many things researched inside the vault, FEV was one of the most heavily studied. The prototype vault is located within the Brotherhood of Steel's base in Texas and can be found in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. It was a testing ground for technologies that would be used in the secret vault, and is now used as a training center for the Brotherhood of Steel.
Having a highly classified research facility buried underground is probably the most realistic scenario of all of these, right? That's something that it makes a lot of sense, especially if you planned on moving your entire civilization underground. What you would really want to do is, instead of isolating them, you would want them to be connected to one another. You would want them to be networked, and if at all possible, have some method of engaging in exchange for goods and services. As we discussed, right, if there are thousands of vaults, many of them will fail. Every day, some will need new parts, and the best way to do that, often in the case of an emergency, is to commandeer parts from other places, either from abandoned vaults or just simply trade one vault spare, have a vault with a spare, provide it to the other vault. That would require, of course, opening the vault and journeying across the above ground world. But to do that, you would need centralized command and control. And so there would logically be a command and control vault that would probably engage in some form of R&D, if for no other reason than to attempt to solve the problems that the other vaults are facing, while having access to improved production, machine shops, etc., etc.
The unfinished vault is located on the west coast of the United States and can be found in Fallout 2. As the name suggests, the vault was not finished, so it's basically just a cave. The Los Angeles Vault is located, surprise surprise, in Los Angeles, California, and can be found in Fallout. It was a demonstration vault constructed by Vault Tech, which ended up being extremely popular. The vault was a fully functioning vault, so people took shelter inside during the Great War. Some years later, the residents left the vault and created some of the various factions that can be encountered in Fallout. Alright, that's gonna do it for this video about every vault in
All right, guys, that was pretty interesting. I gotta say, I was really expecting some of the vaults. You know what? They're all pretty unrealistic. And if there's one thing Fallout lore has taught us, it's that the people in charge of the Fallout universe, they're pretty stupid. Much like the people in charge of our universe, but somehow even dumber. But nonetheless, it certainly was entertaining. And if you guys want me to check out more Fallout lore, let me know in the comments. Other than that, until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for our Lieutenant tier patrons. If you guys want access to some exclusive content, Patreon is the place. I'll see you in the next one.